love how official that is.
I know.
Exactly.
When I'm driving in the car, I use Siri a lot, like voice to text or whatever. And I swear her voice changed. And it's like super official now and formal. And I even asked her, I was like, did your voice change? And she didn't recognize that question, of course. But wait a second, I thought we were friends here.
All right, exactly. What happened?
Yeah.
What happened? Yeah, the voice to text is always, it usually comes back with banter from my family, is because it changes something that I said to something that doesn't make any sense.
I also make it very clear that I'm using voice to text, so it's like they don't think there's anything wrong with me or anything, like, just to be clear.
Right, exactly. Right. Well, I probably should turn on that feature that when you're driving, right? So that way when they respond, you know, they know that I'm driving, and so that probably is voice to text. It make it a little bit more more official, that, you know, they know it, versus just trying to go, what are you trying to say here?
But then that's fun too, so, you know, don't take all the fun out.
Yeah, you never know what's going to come out of it, right?
Right.
And always make it interesting.
Or how like acronyms get read out loud is pretty funny.
Well, yeah, that's that is one problem on the business side, right?
Everything has an acronym.
Right. Yeah, I do think though that you may have the longest acronym of anybody.
You know, I went for that. Thank you for noticing.
So you succeeded.
Thank you. Thank you. I like to, I might just add something else to it, you know,
Right.
like the next technology buzzword, I might just add it to my title.
At
Just
the
to
next
see if anybody
staff
notices.
meeting, hey guys, we need to add another letter to this.
Yeah.
Not quite.
So our acronym actually has a number in it. And like I have said, I might add an extra number or like switch it up a little bit, you know, so now I might have to do that, Chris.
Oh my goodness. All right, well, as looks like it's 9 o'clock, so let's get started here as folks are joining in. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second season of ATAR Cloud and Coffee, the place for discussions on all things modernization and transformation. My name is Chris Oglesby with MorphWorks, and my co-host.
Hey, I'm Terry Lee Holland, Data Center and Cloud Hosting Services Division Head at Nywick Land. If you heard our banter, there's an acronym for that. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us.
Before the introduction of our guest today, the platform is hosted under the ATAR Cloud and Infrastructure pillar with the goal of bringing lessons learned and ideas to the ATAR community. Our focus will be a conversation about our guests' experience, past and present, executing modernization and transformation efforts. At the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button. So feel free to enter in questions and we'll work those questions into our discussion. So now let's move on to introductions. Today, our guest is Ryan Hillard with the Small Business Administration. Ryan, would you mind sharing a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I am a systems developer that works for the Chief Information Officer, and I've been to SBA for 5 years. And during that time, I've spent the majority of my efforts moving our workloads into different cloud environments and modernizing them so that they'll run more efficiently inside of those cloud environments. So I'm really excited to be here with Chris and Terry Lee and to share some of the hard mistakes I've made so others can benefit from those lessons learned.
Thank you very much, and welcome to the show. So Ryan has a interesting story that it sounds a little bit like a startup story, but a little bit in reverse. And as he was, as we were getting ready for the call today, just introducing each other, he was sharing this story, which involves a little bit of excitement, a lot of passion, a drive across country, and having to share digital devices. So Ryan, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing, because I think it gives perspective on, on everybody's experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2015, right around Thanksgiving, I received a call from one of my former bosses, and he said, "Hey, there's this really exciting opportunity to go change government." And at the time, I was super naive, and I thought that was possible. So I took the call, and I interviewed with a couple of folks at the SBA, and the SBA has this really, really cool advantage as an organization in the world. It has a holy purpose. Its holy purpose is to help small businesses succeed. And that's pretty much as American as you can possibly get. Everyone knows a small business owner. Small business kind of powers our economy. So I was really excited about that because at the time I worked for LegalZoom and we were already big champions of small business. I understood the problem space very well. So I packed up all my stuff. I sold most of my stuff, I should say. Packed up all my stuff, drove across the country from Austin, Texas. Thought I had to be there by like Monday at 8 a.m. to report. Fear was inspired in me to be there by 8 a.m. to report for orientation. Literally drove all weekend. This is Super Bowl Sunday, so I think like February 7th, 2016. Got into DC, saw the last half of the Super Bowl, literally threw everything we possibly could into our row home. And this will also tell you how naive we were. We like talked to the landlord and said, "So you've never had any mice problems, right?" Like, "Oh no, we've never had any rodent problems or anything like that." We move in, go down to the basement, open the first drawer. It's just chock-a-block full of mouse traps, right? And I think, oh, I'm gonna get that landlord, right? Well, every row home in DC has had mice for longer than it has people. So anyway,
they're not mice; they're rats.
Thank you. That makes you, if you think of them as mice, you can sleep at night.
Right, exactly.
But anyway, long story short, reported for duty the next morning, and then was immediately given like 2 days to figure out what is DC and all this sort of stuff. And I went to HR orientation, came out of that, and was given one laptop and one phone. And my new coworker and I were told to share those things because the agency had a shortage at the time. And so literally the administrative assistant would bring us the paper every morning, so that whoever had the computer or whoever was making calls, the other person had something to do. So that first week, I had this like, what have I just done? I left this really fun job with this awesome high-performing team, a great network, an agile software development practice, and now I'm doing this. And so I quickly got my bearings, and here we are 5 years later. But yeah, that was the start. It was a very scary start, Chris.
So the moral of that story is SBA has a startup organization as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. But we still got you, right? Like 5 years later, we still have you. So one of the things, Ryan, that we talked about when we were having our prep call, and I really liked the idea of the myth busting. And so I know that you have a list of the myths that you want to bust, and I just think that would be awesome to just start chiming through. And if you don't mind, Chris and I will kind of jump in with questions, and we just encourage any of the audience to ask the questions as we go through this too. What we talked about and what you sent over, I was sitting there the whole time saying, yes, every day. Yes. So I'm really excited to get into this. And I don't think we're going to get through your list in an hour. I'm just going to say that.
Okay, great. So yeah. I did think it would be fun as part of your Christmas episode to come and kind of be a Grinch about cloud and be like, okay, here's 8. And I have, maybe we'll get them down. We'll get through all of them because I've put them down in 8 different cards. I actually wrote them down. So
you came prepared.
That's right. So this is the 8 cloud myths of Christmas.
I love this.
Oh,
impressive.
This is awesome.
This is like an after school special. We're definitely doing this at the wrong time.
I know I was going to like draw a poster with my daughter, you know, and hang it up, but I ran out of time last night. So anyways, myth number one, and these are things that I hear in the federal space, and I always sit back and I go, what are these people reading? Because they are, you know, these ideas are so far from my actual experience. So that's why I'm calling them myths. Myth number one, the cloud or clouds are interoperable, right? And the idea here that I keep hearing from people is, oh yeah, I want this workload to run AWS just as well as it will run on Azure. And if AWS goes down, we'll just switch it over to Azure, no problem, right? Because these cloud things are interoperable. And I think the reality is that people saying that have never done any actual work in either AWS, Azure, or the other big one, GCP, right? Google Cloud Platform. Because one, their service offerings are very different. We're going to talk about another myth, but they're very different. And you know, I'm just going to use an example. AWS offers the simple email service, SES, which is a transactional email service you can leverage if you're building a custom application to send email like customer sign up email, you know, password reset, notification email, that sort of stuff. In Azure, they point you to a third-party vendor called SendGrid, right? They don't have a native service for transactional email yet. I'm sure they will soon. They probably will announce it right after I say this on the podcast, right? And in the same way, neither of the either AWS or Azure really have anything comparable to a big data warehouse-ish thing like Google has with BigQuery. So when we think about like, hey, you know, we want our data warehouse to be just transportable. One, that's like the most insane myth I've ever heard. But we want our data warehouse to be transportable. There is not a one-to-one offering across the three major leading cloud providers. So the cloud is not interoperable.
So let's dig in on this a little bit. So how do you help with what I would say is a need, which is portability, right? Because I think, you know, that there's always been this challenge that you know, the contracting community and the government organizations or commercial organizations navigate, right? Well, we want you to take it. Oh no, we want it. You know, it's a colo, it's a GoCo, it's a Coco. I mean, you go through all of these, you know, it is a pendulum, right? But you're always navigating these things. And I think one of the big keys that isn't quite honestly discussed enough is the portability, right? How do you create the portability of what you're doing, not necessarily the interoperability, right? So how do organizations really kind of look at it from a portability standpoint?
Yeah, so gosh, this is going to be painful, I think, for some people. The way to maintain portability is to focus on the infrastructure as a service or the lowest level of maturity offerings from cloud providers. So virtual machines, full stop. Virtual machines and network, right? The only other additional thing I would say is possible would be object storage. So because S3, Amazon's object storage service, came out like a generation before anything else, it actually defined the space. So you'll see vendors that say like, hey, we have an S3 compliant API, meaning their API looks enough like S3's that you know, there is possibly that idea of interoperability or interchangeability. If you go beyond those things, Chris, you will become less and less portable, right? So I wish I had like a light board and I could draw a sliding scale, but as you become more mature in your adoption of cloud services, and I'm defining maturity as low maturity being infrastructure as a service, mid being platform, and then of course the end one being kind of serverless or software as a service. As you climb that maturity ladder, you're also climbing a lock-in ladder, right? And this is one of those things where it's like, okay, we want to do all this really advanced stuff. Well, that's great, but you are sacrificing portability, and you need to be really aware of that. Now, that's in 2021. One prediction I would make is that 3 to 5 years from now, there's going to be a whole nother tier of vendors that just run stuff on top of major cloud providers, that major cloud providers do, compute, network, and storage, but they only use them for that. And you will be able to actually achieve that long lusted after dream of portability or interoperability. And some of those vendors I'll just call out, like Snowflake, Supabase, there's serverless, the serverless framework, serverless.com. They just released their own serverless cloud, which feels a lot like AWS under the right. It's like you're using a lot of words that remind me that you're running on AWS right now, right? But those vendors will, I think, inside of 3 to 5 years, fulfill that promise. Not today, though.
I felt like there was an elephant in the room that we weren't saying, which was the vendor lock-in piece, right? Like we really see that that's something that everybody asks, how do we not become dependent on a vendor? And it's like, well, you don't do the things that you're projecting to do, and I think it comes down to one of the topics that we've talked a lot about is like the strategy piece is kind of missing, because the strategy, I think, would help drive from the government standpoint where we're going and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So, but yeah, vendor lock-in, it's going to be interesting. But I would love to see what you said in 3 to 5 years. I would love to see that be a thing. I think that would help us out a lot.
So in 3 to 5 years, we need to have you back.
Yeah.
We'll document the predictions and see.
So Terry Lee, I was about to say that. I was about to say, the nice part is this is now recorded and on the internet, so it'll be available forever to make me look like a fool in 3 to 5 years when I'm wrong. The thing about the kind of one thing you just said, which elicits a strong reaction from me, is this concept of strategy, right? Like going to the cloud is not a strategy. Yeah, I think federal enterprises, the different federal agencies, they need to have good business reasons to adopt cloud technology. And sometimes it feels like they don't. They're just like, cloud forward, right?
It's 100% to the cloud.
Yeah, and so so Chris, because I have that 5-year startup story with the SBA, I've gotten to do a lot of fun things. One of those is I was the IT specialist asked to go document some of the agency's data centers, right? And I can tell you that one data center I walked into had water sprinklers running above their servers, and had more combustible material in the data center than I have in my garage, right? It was just like stacks and stacks of cardboard boxes behind racks. So we we're not good at data centers. We, the federal enterprise, and I feel pretty good about saying that generally. I can say that specifically about the SBA, but and so that concept of cloud adoption, so that we just aren't managing the data center itself, has some value actually, without having a business strategy. But then once you start talking about advanced technology, managed databases and serverless technology, which is what I do a lot of, you have to be cognizant of the fact that the value is not in staying portable, because you won't be.
All right. Are we moving on to, we need to get a little taste of the French pressed coffee, but keep yourself going.
Yeah, is now the time to share?
Yeah, before you share number 2, yeah, why don't you share your coffee story? Because hey, had we had you last year, it wouldn't have really worked.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't.
Or maybe it was because of us that you.
I wouldn't have even qualified for this podcast a year ago. So I recently had my second child, and I just started drinking coffee as a result. And my coworkers tell me I'm insane because it's like, how did you get through college without coffee? That's nuts. I've gone on a coffee journey too, and my coffee journey started with like Mr. Coffee and garbage Folgers, and now I'm very snobby and I drink only French press from. This is actually a Texas pecan because I'm a Texan, and I don't know. That may actually take me down a rung in terms of coffee snobs. They're like, oh, flavor.
Yeah, I don't know that. Yeah, I don't know that really fits, right? That's
But
maybe that, but that is, you are from Austin, right? The Austin area. That's where you moved up here from, right?
yep.
Yeah. So I mean, that's kind of Texas, but it has a little extra Silicon Valley in it.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, so yes, I'm drinking French press coffee, 4 minutes only, sir.
Right. Ground to what grain level?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't tell you how many microns the grounds
Right.
are.
No, you're not quite snob level yet then. You're not
Right.
quite-
That's the next stage. Oh my gosh. All right. So we'll make sure we have time to get through your myths and predictions. Myth number 2.
Okay, myth number 2 is the cloud is fungible, right? And I kind of already talked about this a little bit, so we don't have to hover on this one, but this idea that all the cloud offerings are the same is just not true. And one cloud is not created equal to another cloud. And one of the anecdotes I can tell you about this without mentioning particular vendors is we were having a performance issue with one of our applications, and we boiled it down to a network problem, but an internal network problem using this particular cloud vendor. And we benchmarked to see like, hey, what's going on here? And we were getting different physical speed than was being advertised. Well, we went back to the vendor and we said, hey, you're saying you get, let's say 10 gigabit inside of your network, and we're clearly not getting that. And this is kind of strange problem we're having. And they kind of came back and were like, yeah, you're not going to actually physically get that, right? And so there's also this idea of like marketecture, right? Marketing architecture. And you see this on these vendor pages, and I will pick on AWS here because I spend all of my time in AWS, right? Most of my workloads run in AWS, but the most dangerous button in the world is the deploy with CloudFormation button, right? It's like on the tutorial page, it's a little gold button. It's just the right color. Some marketing person like nailed the hex code on that button, right? Because it just makes you want to press it. And you press it and it's magical because you have all of these cloud resources spun up, right? All of a sudden.
Money,
Fantastic.
money.
Money. But also, like, do you understand what you just did when you press that button? And what is one of our cloud infrastructure leads likes to ask the question, what do your day 2 operations look like? Because you like ran through this tutorial, you spun up all this infrastructure, you're doing stuff, that's great, but how are you going to maintain it in the future? And so, these things are not fungible across clouds, and neither are they portable. So that's myth number 2.
Nice, very nice.
Yeah, I like that one. All right, let's go to number 3.
Okay,
Lucky number 3.
I like this one because it strikes deeply at the heart of cloud and coffee. You guys have discussed this a lot, but the cloud is more expensive. The cloud is more expensive. So I've watched a couple of episodes in prep for this call, and one of the things that I think you guys talk about very well is that the cloud can be more expensive for you if you aren't thoughtful about your migration. But one of the nuances that I wanted to tease out of that idea is, in some circles, that's been generalized into, hey, the cloud is just more expensive. And you're going to have to run a smaller workload, let's say, than you were used to on-prem in order to achieve cost efficiency. And I think the problem there, the thing that I want to tease out is that if your operating are poorly set up on-prem, and you migrate those into a cloud environment, and suddenly it feels like your cloud, your cloud costs are more expensive than your on-prem ones were. What you're actually seeing is the fact that you weren't good at operations, right? And so the cloud lets you do things like better, faster, stronger. And that includes bad things, right? So if you have really poor form on the bench press, I have no idea why I'm using weightlifting. I don't even lift weights, right? Like, I'm a skinny nerd. But if you have poor form on the bench press, and you go and you get on a Smith machine with rails where you can just, you don't have to control the weight, you can just push as hard as you possibly can, which is kind of like the cloud, you can get hurt way faster than if you force yourself to have good form and build those supporting muscles. And in our cloud analogy, do things like revisit the size of a workload. Is it running efficiently? Have we provisioned our VMs on-prem to be the correct size? Are they using the right amount of CPU and memory? If you get into the cloud and your solution to every problem is, okay, just double the size of the VM, yes, it will be more expensive. Absolutely.
So I want to talk about this and tie it a little bit. We talk a little bit about the strategy, but you can have the strategy and then get into a mode, right? To where you're in that operational mode. Things are going great, everything's evolving. How do you make sure that because at some point, whether it be a personnel change, whether it be a new mandate, how do you make sure as an agency? Because again, a lot of it is your technology. We're obviously, as a company, we're more consultative, so we're helping try to help make those decisions better. But there is a point at which the organization gets into a mode, right? And you get government or commercial, you get into a mode, and that mode all of a sudden has now bad habits, right? And all of a sudden those bad habits become a problem. How do you have a refresh? Like, how do you take somebody that is mission focused, like, hey, we did this 3 years ago, because what's happening, and we've talked about this a lot, but this is a different approach to it, right? Because how do you make sure your processes are where they need to be? Like, and that you're not stagnant, that you are evolving with the technology that is available. So that way it isn't the next time you have to really kind of fix something, it's a big modernization effort.
For medium to large organizations, this is the lottery question, right? How do you build a high performing team? And how do you maintain one? I have set, like, Chris, I literally I literally lay in bed at night and stare at the ceiling, can't sleep because I think about this problem, right? I think that so I'm addressing the federal program managers out there who are hopefully listening to this. You as a program manager need to think of your organization like a human. How do humans build? They build them very slowly over time by layering them on, right? So if I wake up, I'm a runner. If I wake up one day and say, I want to run a marathon someday, the way that I actually get to that point is I walk a mile on day one, right? And then I go buy a pair of new sneakers. And then next week, I'm going to start walking 2 miles, and then I'm going to walk 3 miles. I see this critical mistake being made in organizations where they want to do everything all at once really quick. And this is because there's a lot of fervor and excitement around cloud. That is the most surefire way to fail. It's to say, okay, you know what? We've got 50 IT professionals, 50 federal IT specialists. We're going to have 50 projects, or better yet, we're going to have 150 projects, because each one of you GS14s or GS15s is capable of managing at least 3 projects. And all of these are going to move. I've never actually heard this. This is all hypothetical.
This is the grid.
Yes, exactly. And each one of you is going to move one of your applications, to the cloud by Thursday. And that's like asking someone who's never run a marathon to wake up and run a 10K on day 1 of training in their old sneakers when they're dehydrated. you're going to puke at mile 3, and you're going to retire and never run again, or never try and run a marathon again. So I know I didn't like directly address your question, but I think the trick is to really, if we could boil it down to an axiom, is to start small and do small things and build that habit, and then build on top of that habit, right? And get better and better and better. The advantages that the federal enterprise have are that, one, you have a whole bunch of people who are going to be around for a long time, right? Federal employees work for the federal government for a long time, so they have that advantage. And then two, almost every federal agency has purpose. It has like a really strong, cool purpose in the world. And that's hard to find in some private things. I know a guy who does the programming for like your like Whirlpool microwave, right? And sometimes he has like a hard time going into work because he's like, okay, I'm gonna like this optimized. Like good for him. But like I get to wake up and think about how we're going to offer better business counseling to new entrepreneurs, and how we're going to turn that into a digital service and run it better in the cloud. Like I get to think about that in the morning, and that's like I don't need coffee for that. I don't need coffee to get excited about my workday.
And us entrepreneurs, thank you for that.
I'll also say that the federal government should have you talk to people about coming to work for us, because that was quite the speech there about coming and working and having the purpose, because I think that is what a lot of it's about, and it does get lost. But I really like what you said about like starting small and growing from there. Like we talk a lot about the technologies that we want to use, but we don't talk about changing the culture to get us there. And we want to push the culture top down because there are, I work military branches, we work top down, and that's not how it works. And it is refreshing though, because we are starting to see that like small organic efforts are starting to build up. And so I really think this is where like some of your other myths kind of come into play with like how we're moving forward with these technologies too, is like we're taking care of some of the smaller things, like you said, but now we're going to get into the bigger, I'm going to point back to strategy. It's the strategy discussions. And I think like your next set of myths are going to lead us into that pretty well.
So one of the, I'll try. So Terry Lee, I'll try not to get too starry-eyed here because I'm like pretty patriotic, but one of the cool things about cloud is we are rapidly getting to this long promise point where we can actually think about code and systems that are only business logic, right? That means, so for some legacy folks, that's scary because they're let's say they were a network engineer, and now we don't really need to think about networks, right? Like I don't care about the CIDR range that this thing runs inside of in the subnet, or but for most people who are really mission driven and purpose inspired, this is really neat because now you can spend less and less of your time worrying about commodity things and more of your time worrying about how you're going to actually solve a problem. And that's why I'm such a bull when it comes to cloud technology and advanced cloud technology like serverless technology, because it lets you spend more of your time thinking about real problems.
Yeah, I think before to do a plug for one of our working groups, the Cloud Migration Working Group has recently been working on skill gaps, right? And I think one of the things that gets discussed in there is everybody wants to focus on the technical skill gaps. And I think what's happening is, the kind of the old adage of you still need to have those management gaps, right? You still need to have those people skills. But right now we're really trying to push everybody to, specialize. And so, as that, they had a webinar recently, they're working on a white paper. I mean, that is something to think about if you are in a technical role, the ability, number one, to communicate, the ability to understand, the ability to to kind of have that self-awareness of, hey, this is a problem we need to look at from a process, from a skill standpoint, not just how do we solve it with technology.
I've navigated this problem with several organizations in their agile transformations, and the role of a traditional manager who sometimes feels left behind by an agile transformation, because your engineering manager who used to do things like write tickets and tell people what to do is in this really cool role, if you can get them to see it, of how they're going to develop their staff. And how are they going to give them the skills they need to, they may finally have time in their week for an individual one-on-one with each of their staff members, which every manager should do, like full stop, right? Their direct reports. That's hard to do in the federal enterprise, which is very, Terry Lee, to your point, very hierarchical, and wants things to flow in a certain direction, right? The most successful folks building systems today are doing it in a way of decentralized decision-making. So they've taken those formerly hierarchical column-like structures, and they've said, that person at the top. So I used to draw this thing called what I called the leadership trough of despair. I'm going to try not to go down that. I'm the Grinch, but I'm not that Grinchy. I'll try not to go down that road too deeply. But what that concept describes is that the further you get away from your end user, the less capable you are of decision making that is impactful, right? So at an organization I used to work for, I called that the director, which is directors have no idea what their staff do, right? Unless they just go and actually work side by side with their staff. But that's really hard for a federal enterprise to say, hey, directors, you're no longer, if you're doing your job is to build a system and create an environment where all of your really smart people can make decisions for you, right? For your systems. And so like, if you're front-end web developer and your UX UI designer are building a system and they're collaborating with your DevOps engineer to figure out how that system is going to run in the cloud, they should never need to talk to you, director. And that feels real ooky for a lot of traditional managers because they want to know what's going on. They want to be in all the meetings and all that sort of stuff. And but that's where they're going to be successful. And I'm a zealot when it comes to high trust, and I'm happy to come at me, bros. I'm happy to have a fight with anyone or a logical discussion, spirited logical discussion about why you should be pushing to the absolute maximum the amount of trust you're giving to your individual contributors and your team members.
So much of that just really hit home. And I really wish, I hate to say this now, that you had painted your face green, because I really think that would have just carried your message.
Do you have a dog by the chance named Max?
Right, pulling a sleigh.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I've been known to do crazy stuff like that. So,
so that one was all off of cloud is expensive, I think.
Yes.
I don't think we made it past the third myth.
Yeah,
I told you.
Yeah, you did, Terry Lee. You predicted it. I'm staring at my sad stack of cards here.
No,
yeah.
but I'm loving
all right,
it.
Here we go.
We're not having these discussions enough, so this is all good stuff.
Okay, this
might
is
have to
super
have a part 2.
Yeah. If you'll have me.
As long as you come in costume with your stuff, green face and everything.
I've several times toyed with, I told you I was patriotic. I've several times toyed with the idea of a red, white, and blue mohawk. So maybe I'll come with that. So you cannot adopt the cloud casually, right? And you hear this sometimes with training efforts where someone says, oh yeah, we're gonna, and guess what? We're gonna start doing brown bag lunches. And yeah, that's how you guys are gonna become cloud engineers. Whoa, this is crazy. I mean, to operate in the cloud as an engineer means you now have to take a bunch of distributed disciplines, right? Like network engineers and you know, people who maintain servers. What did you call those in the old days? I don't even know. And you put them to, yeah, and you know, you're combining them with this concept of an SRE, a site reliability engineer, right? Who has to like really know how networks work, really know how VMs work, and sometimes like Windows VMs and Linux VMs, you name it, and also has to have this appreciation for new cloud concepts, like you know, how did these things scale? What does it look like to develop an auto scaling group? Do things scale in as well as out? Because sure, your workloads can grow as demand does, but when workload shrink, you know, when demand shrinks, does your workload also shrink back in? This concept of elasticity, which is very much a day two thing. No one thinks about that out of the gate. So no, you cannot. My fourth myth is you cannot adopt the cloud casually. If you plan on doing that as a program manager in the federal government, you should probably set aside at least 20% of your engineer's time per week. So an entire day, right? That's like 8 hours. An entire day for them to just skill, just run through labs, just do hands-on work every week. And no, that doesn't mean you can schedule meetings with them on that day. And no, that doesn't mean that they can do other things in the background. You know, they need to be in a dark room with their favorite coffee, building that mental model that they'll need to be successful. So that's number 4.
I think that's, you know, that really kind of feeds off of everything that we just, the cloud is too expensive, right? I mean, I think it's one of those things where if you didn't get that point through the other myth, you know, it is key, right? And I think one of the things that we talk about a lot on this show is the new speed, right? The new speed is a new problem, and that problem is, okay, here's what we're going to do. Oh my God, you know, by the time we started executing, the technology has changed, right? The environments have changed. Sometimes the companies don't even exist anymore by the time you move through it, or they've been acquired. And so I think the feed is perfect into the, you know, don't adopt it casually, because it really is that understanding of, you need to focus on what you're trying to achieve. You need to focus on the processes, and then what is the best way to use the technology to effectively deliver those processes.
I have a really, I think I have you know, it's rare to have a really perfectly fitting story, but I think a great story to tell about that. So last year, at the height of the global pandemic, Congress, the president, and the American people called on the Small Business Administration to help with economic relief. And they did that through programs like the Paycheck Protection Program. Well, the SBA was situated to respond to that demand, that requirement, because it had adopted cloud technology. If we had not adopted cloud technology, we would have still been ordering servers like today, and the Paycheck Protection Program would have been a failure. And an example of what I mean precisely is we were given the requirement to stand up a portal for small community-focused lenders to accept and be able to place Paycheck Protection Program loan applications. So these are the banks you drive by on your way to work, right? That you don't recognize on the news. These are not the banks of America, right? These are the small banks that can't afford big IT departments, so they don't integrate with our big loan directly. So we hired, when we were given this requirement, we hired a team from AWS Professional Services, and that team came, they literally like parachuted in, built an application for us running entirely on top of serverless technology. So in AWS terms, that's Lambda, SQS, DynamoDB, S3, a couple of other things like CloudFront. And we hired a contracting team, Chris, over the weekend, literally Saturday night, did usability testing over the weekend, modified Sunday night, and did final sign off by Monday so that the program could go live and that small community lenders could process things. That's a different level of speed by several orders of magnitude that the SBA was not used to prior to last year, right? We built an application in a week. That application over the course of like 5 months took 140,000 loans, moving, I think, around $15 billion and saving, according to our heuristics, like in the millions of numbers of jobs level, right? So I joked to the team, like, hey guys, you're done. Like, you've peaked in your careers. You're never going to do a week of work, right? These like 12 people, like, you're never going to do a week of work that is magnified into this much good in the world ever again. So, go ahead and retire. But
That's it. That's a mic drop situation right there, if
Yeah.
I've ever heard one.
and the cool part is, like, as a program manager, I did like a very little bit of work to help that, right? I helped sign off on the ATO itself. I helped evaluate the architecture, and I actually got to do some of the usability testing, which was totally crazy, right? It was essentially it essentially reduced down to spear phishing, and by that I mean we were spear phishing our own customers, right? So like launch this thing, and I'm really good friends with this banker in Ohio because he was the first one to place his thing. I literally just sent him a thing. We got his information. I called him on the phone and said, hey, I know this is a crazy call. My name's Ryan Hillard. I work for the SBA. Can I talk to you about your experience using our new system, right? And that was done in a week, and was a very successful program. Not possible without cloud technology. Also, the demand for that.
Lots of things that need to go into that one. So
Yep.
Great story about technology and process and understanding.
Yeah, and thank you for being a part of it. One of the things that you keyed on though was like your role as a PM, and then we had talked about training the engineers to not go down the path of cloud in a casual way. But like, one of the things that we talked about before as well was having a good PM in that position, I think, to guide that adoption and to bring it all together. So can you talk a little bit about like your role in that? Because I do think we struggle with from a leadership perspective of, engineers, we want engineering, right? And we have, managers that know how to like report status or, put the brief together. But I think we're getting into a point where there needs to be a really good blend of those skills. And it sounds like you have them. So enlighten us on what that looks like, please.
Yeah, I don't think I have the that's very flattering, Terry Lee. So I appreciate you. But actually one of the things I struggle with is not being a too in the weeds program managers. I think an effective program manager in the federal enterprise, in the IT space, has to do two things well, which is one, you have to continuously rub elbows with industry to understand what's out there and what you can leverage to your advantage. And this is not one of my official myths, but I kept hearing when I first started in the federal government, oh, well, you can't go talk to those people. We can't know what's happening out there, right? Like that's, you better call it market research, right? And that's crazy. Make an effective technology decision if you don't know the alternatives and what's out there and what's available. So number one, you have to continually keep your ear to the ground, and you have to understand how industry is changing even outside of the federal space. And then number two is you have to have hard technical skills. For some reason, the federal government has seemingly lobotomized itself over the last 30 years. And a lot of federal program managers think that their only two responsibilities are to hire contractors and maintain a budget. And my question to all of those people is, how do you judge the quality of your contractor's work if you don't know what they're doing, right? So, and an example I would say is if your program is going to adopt cloud technology, and maybe you're going to consider an advanced practice like writing your infrastructure as code, which you probably should consider if you're deep into a cloud journey. You need to write some infrastructure as code as a program manager. And you need to do that because now you'll understand both the powerful aspects of why you adopt something like that, and also the pain points, why you wouldn't do it. And you need to do that. You need to be hands-on as a program manager. So number 2 is you need to have hard skills, and you need to continually be building those. Otherwise, you don't understand the plight of the people you're managing, and you got to do that. So.
All right, so we're now getting close. we literally might have to have a part 2.
5, 6, 7, 8, go.
And actually, there is an opening the day before Christmas Eve on the 23rd.
Oh.
So it might be fitting for the Grinchy approach.
I was going to say, how dare you invite the Grinch to Christmas Eve? You're asking for trouble there.
So what are we
okay.
on, number 5?
Yes, we're on number 5. So the cloud is just containers. It's just a bunch of containers, right? And if you know Docker, it's all just the same, whatever. And this is lightly touching on the fungibility and interoperability myths as well, but people specifically say this, it's just containers. And it's not, if you really want to have a hard technical discussion about that, I would point folks to two different things, which is you should go look at a vendor called Cloudflare and their use of V8 isolates to run their Cloudflare Workers service, which is their function as a service. So like Lambda or Azure Functions or Google's Cloud Functions. Go look at that, or go look at AWS's Firecracker project and how they run Lambda. Because like on a hard technical level, everything is not just containers. So I want to address those people who are like, no, it's really all just containers. And then secondly, though, like obviously the service offering is much bigger than that, right? Object storage, API gateway, content delivery networks, like it's to absurdity. It's just containers. So.
All right. I'm not gonna dive into that one because I think that is its own, because I do think there is a. Okay, well, let me get to the next myth, because otherwise we will have a part 2.
And then we can and then we can dive in. Yeah. So the next one is, I think we can also just state and leave there, but I'm happy to discuss as well, which is you're going to the cloud, so you should adopt Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is a kind of, I'd say, level 2 technology for container orchestration, right? And it was built by the good folks at Google, and it has somehow taken by storm the DevOps and the infrastructure engineering community over the last couple of years, despite the fact that it's really, really hard. It's like really difficult. And the reason why it's really difficult is because it's doing a bunch of really cool advanced things, but most folks don't need it, right? So why did the folks at Google create Kubernetes? Well, they created Kubernetes because they run things like Google search, right? And Google search, it has a scale that none of us can imagine at this point. And so so the question you should ask yourself is, some consultant has showed up and said, we're going to adopt Kubernetes, is do you have Google level scale? Do you need Kubernetes for these things? The truth is, and I'll hold up this project because it's dear to my heart, but it's now kind of dead, that like Docker Swarm was the alternative file, and it was from Docker Inc. directly, and it was their container orchestrator. It's really easy to work with. It had a good set, but for a lot of other reasons, it didn't succeed. It was a lot easier to adopt something like Docker Swarm. You have to build a whole practice around Kubernetes if you're going to adopt Kubernetes. So it's not that you shouldn't It's just that you should be aware of the expense of that, and it's not a default thing. One of the things we've never done, we don't use Kubernetes at the SBA, and we've serviced real workloads like PPP and IDLE and SBA.gov. I mean, SBA.gov was tweeted out by the president, which is like the sweatiest moment in any IT professional's life, right? SBA.gov lives on infrastructure that I work with. And our system did scale under load. It scaled to be like 300% larger than it normally is. From that Twitter traffic, we went from 3,000 to 90,000 concurrent users in like 5 minutes. We didn't use Kubernetes. Like, is the president tweeting out your website or your web app, right? Like, so I don't think in the federal workspace, there's anything bigger in terms of rush demand. So anyways, that's number 6, adopt. You don't necessarily have to adopt Kubernetes.
All right. Number 7.
Okay, number 7. So so number 7 is really about this idea that you have to have advanced practices if you adopt the cloud, right? And this isn't really a myth per se, but more me trying to help people instrument which advanced practices they need to adopt. So, and I tease this one talking about infrastructure as code. So, and Terry Lee has touched on this a little bit, but if you're not good at change control on premises, then you don't necessarily need to adopt some advanced practice like infrastructure as code to help you track changes in the cloud until you already get good at change control just independently. That problem is orthogonal to technology, right? And so, because we have a little limited time left, like be cognizant of your advanced practices that you're adopting and which ones are really hard to train versus which ones are your organization is capable of. So if you have an army of Windows system administrators and you're saying, hey, we're going to go, declaratively, this is not a hypothetical. Every federal agency, I think, has an army of Windows, right? If you're going to go express your infrastructure in code, so declaratively, you need to think really hard about how hard that's going to be and the mind shift that involves, right? So that's my one on advanced practices. And then an 8th one, but I lied to you. It's not a myth.
Oh, let's just go there.
Okay, so number 8 is about real value. And the real value of the cloud, I would like to challenge, you hear all the time that it's cost savings, but it's actually this concept of opportunity cost that you've regained. And I told you the story about Lender Gateway, that application we built to help the PPP program, but your ability to do things that you couldn't have done before is really what you're gaining, and that alacrity that Chris talked about, that speed to deliver on mission, that, if you had to go through a 90-day procurement process, and that's a fast one in our world.
I was going to say, who does that?
Yeah, if you have to go through a 90-day procurement process to buy servers, and your program is 90 days long, you're in big trouble, right? And I'm not making up these sorts of deadlines based off of the last couple of years, where Congress has literally passed a law and said, hey, dear federal agency, you will do this by this date, right? And then OMB is like, beating you over the head to do that thing. If your procurement time cycle doesn't support that, because you have to go buy servers, that's cool.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good one. And one of the things that, and I know we're tying up here, Chris, but that's one of the things, like whenever we get asked to put together any like return on investment and, like all of those wonderful briefs that we all love to do, that's a really hard one to, I feel like needs 10 times more focus than just doing a cost comparison of the different clouds and what it's going to cost us to host it where. It's the return and how you just scoped it is where the real value is. with the processes that the government has to use to get things through. Like, that's how we need to be looking at it, because that is going to be the game changer on this one. It's my favorite new term to use. So, game changer.
Well, and I think it kind of goes to some of what we talked about already, right? Is
Yep.
how do you take all the other myths, work through them, right, to get to this, because it does seem to be that you actually want to jump to real value without going through all the other pieces. And so how do you step back? And again, I think that is the problem, because I think right now everything's about, it's about speed. I think you talked about it, it's the fervor and the excitement of, oh, we're going to the cloud. And, I think that does, turn itself into a bit of a challenge when, you're really trying to understand the real value, right? And so I think that the ability to step back as you're getting ready to make those kind of changes, and these are things that, a lot of the different working groups at ATARC have talked about, is, really kind of working through that, that understanding of what is it that you're trying to do. I mean, the whole customer experience conversation we had with Charlie Lee, right? It's like, okay, there's a lot of pieces, and that's one of them that you need to be thinking about from an overarching program standpoint, not just the little individual piece, but from the overarching program. What is that customer experience that you're trying to, right? And those need to tie into the real value piece. So, well, we did rush through the last couple. I think they could have been, all of these could have been their own show. So maybe maybe that's something to think about. But Ryan, thank you very much for taking the time. It was awesome chatting with you. Everybody on that attended, thank you. Oops, I think we got a question here. Let's get one last question in. The question here is, what types of things do you look for in types of partner companies? I mean, I think I don't know that we can answer that in a minute, but I think some of what's been discussed, those maybe not just bring straight technology, but bring thoughts and ideas around the different pieces. But Ryan, I'll let you finish that one up.
I'm going to be ambitious here and say I can't answer this in a minute. So I think it's two things. I think one, it's proof of work. So not I'll say something dodgy, Chris, get this out if I don't. Like, I would much rather see proof of work on the internet as opposed to as past performance, right? Yep. So like, and then the second thing is, how good are they at hiring? So, I call it the I'm not going to say this. Okay, how good are they at hiring? I was going to say something else, but I'll leave that there, and people can email me. But the how good are they at hiring? Because the reality is, most federal contractors, partners, when they win a contract, they're going out and hiring. And this is particularly true in the small business world, which is my world. And I want everyone here use our programs. Go use a small business. If you're buying cloud, why aren't you buying cloud with a value-added reseller, a small business, right? Like, go do that. But the question you should ask when you're hiring a partner is, how good are they actually at hiring staff members? Do they have a strong sense of culture? Do they have what does working at their company look like on their page? Or does it look like their page was built in like their web page, their corporate web page was built in like the GeoCities Angelfire, right? Because that's like a straight up test. Like, oh, this company, I know what kind of company this is. They have a garbage corporate website. So anyway, those two things, I think. How good are they at hiring? And then do they have proof of work?
Perfect. Well, we are at time. If I could get Terry Lee and Ryan, if I get a little smile for the web page. There we go. And thank you, everybody. Our next event is January 6th. Ryan, this was fantastic. Really appreciate it. Terry Lee, as always, thank you very much. And,
Thank you for having me.
everybody next time. All right.
Thanks.
Thank you.